ahead and get started because we're at time. I know time is precious to everyone. So first off, I would like to say welcome everyone. As always, I am your host, Lindsay Gates, of this edition of TBM Tuesday. For those who don't know me, or if this is your first TBM Tuesday, I am the head of community and operations at the TBM Council. So I get to work with a lot of great members, get the opportunity to hear more about TBM. So I love my job and it is wonderful. I will though, as always, like I like to do on any events that we have, as a reminder, you all please, if you're not a member, please sign up to become a member. It gives you access to great content, assets, details, resources, and just a plethora of information. So please go and do that. TBM Connect or tbm.org, and you can go and see all of our information. So I'm going to go ahead and do an introduction. Okay. So today I have with me Stuart Meredith. So Mr. Meredith, would you like to introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and then how you know TBM?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So hi, everyone. Welcome to this TBM Tuesday. So I've been part of the TBM community since 2010, when Apptio started in Europe. I was part of the two-man team that started Apptio back in Europe then. Predominantly, my role throughout that time has been in the solutions consulting, but obviously I haven't been part of it so early. I've done delivery, I've done kind of like, the architecture, I've done pretty much everything, got involved in the product. Played a fairly leading role in the insights and data things that we've done over the years in Apptio as part of TBM. I actually have a new role right now that has taken me into the enterprise business management space, which is something we're going to expand into. But obviously, I'm calling on more of my TBM experience to bring this kind of data conversation to life today. And also, it's probably worth mentioning to the team or the people on the call, like I've done a lot in IT before I even joined Apptio, like, data, insight, analytics, operations, like actually understanding how IT runs for major organizations before I even became part of the dark arts of the software business. So yes, so that's kind of my background.
So you speak nerd?
I do speak a little bit of nerd.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Thank you. All right. So today we've got a pretty fabulous topic. I'm really excited. Stu definitely, when it comes to data, is going to be able to really explain details about what to do with data, how you get started, how to actually tailor it to the business outcomes. So what we'll do is I'm going to have a conversation with him. He's going to go through a couple slides, but also, since this is a webinar, please make sure we have our chat open. If you have any questions, put it in the chat. If it's something specific to what we're talking about, I'll make sure to pause and ask Stu that question. But if it's something that you can wait till the end, we always leave about 7 minutes for questions for people to ask different bits of information. So don't worry, there is time, and we extended this session to an hour because we thought it was so important. So as we go through this and we talk about, so the intent of the conversation today is about data. Sure. So data for TBM. You may know we updated our framework. So in the framework, part of the bottom part, we're calling the TBM foundations. And one of the key pieces in that is data, because we believe that for TBM, that's a huge part. So can you tell me, as people are starting this journey, what is kind of the foundational data that you need to be able to begin?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, key question, right?
Yep.
And the way I think about it, which is why I asked Talia to kind of throw this slide onto the screen, before you even get into the kind of real data topics, like, because we could just answer really kind of carefree financial data, operational data, but that doesn't mean anything to a lot of people who don't know the data, right?
Yep.
So I've always liked, this is a very old slide that we used around kind of planning needs and other pieces. But every company spends money on technology, on the same things, right? You're spending money on people, you're spending money on vendors, assets, software, hardware. There's nothing really new under the sun. Even if you then extend that into cloud, it's still a vendor service, right?
Yep.
Or your public, private, whatever it is. Or if you extend it into AI and other pieces, these are all kind of tech resources coming together. So the way I think about it when you're starting that journey is, okay, how do I understand what I'm spending? And then what resources does that allow me to pull together? Those are the foundation elements of TBM, right? the actual spend, the who, what, why, where, when, of how people are spending money on what, into that resource level, whether that's people, whether that's vendor, SaaS, cloud, whether it's assets that perhaps you're depreciating over time through your fixed asset register. And then as you move up through the TBM taxonomy, you get into the kind of more operational kind of activity data, which is actually what IT knits together to deliver a service out to the business. So you can look at it on this slide like from two different directions. Either you're being driven by the business units having goals that they need IT to perform certain services or project and development activity, which themselves require assets and resources to furnish those. And that goes back to what you spend. Or you start from the bottom up and say, here's what we spend. These are the resources we get for that spend. This is how it translates into the IT world and servers and storage and cloud services and applications and SaaS and end user. And that supports this, these parts of the business, specifically here, specifically there, and other pieces. So Talia, if you don't mind going to the next slide. On this one, just to frame that in a little bit more detail, you can see there's the financial data and the resource data at the bottom part of the screen. And that is what you need really to start from a foundational level. If you can describe what you're spending, when, and typically that's, let's say, through the financial GL. Or you move into like, perhaps you may need to complement that with your vendor contract management systems, because not everyone's GL is sort of particularly transparent in terms of what it means. It could be full of codes and account codes and everything.
What's a GL, just in case people don't know?
The general ledger, so that is your ERP system of record. But that's set up to like capture those kind of transactional type pieces, but it can be difficult for other people to read if you're not an accountant, if you're not, you don't have a finance background. So typically you would ask for the chart of accounts to come through with that. That gives you the ability to translate the cost center codes, the account codes into what they mean. Is it hardware? Is it software? Is it a particular flavor? Is it depreciation? Is it a general expense? Those kind of details can then be stitched together from a GL perspective to understand what and who and why you're spending that money. Now, obviously, that also requires some element of a description or something in there. So things like the journal line descriptions become really important, or any kind of descriptive text, because your TBM tooling and whatever you're using can take that data and think, okay, I can see it's hardware. I can see perhaps there's a vendor name mentioned, but in a description it might say it's 5 licenses for Salesforce, or it's Office 365 or something of that type, right? So the financial from the GL and potentially complemented by the vendor and contract management systems, if you have them, or from the POs, whatever it would be. Also, actually, think about the fixed asset registers as being another way to complement that, because you might just have some big buckets of expenditure that you're carrying through the books as depreciation. And then obviously in the fixed asset register, it allows you to understand what that spend actually represents. It's a multi-year kind of investment in data center technologies. It's the network refresh. It's a big project that you've decided to capitalize and depreciate over time. And then the resources level, again, super useful. So if you've got tools like Workday or ServiceNow, any kind of HR management system, typically it will describe a cost center, employee name ID. You don't need that level of detail if you don't want to, but you should get some volume of who's in what role, particularly for technology. Are they in support? Are they in development? Are they in management function? Do they work for IT finance? All those kind of pieces can come through from there.
I would like to make one call out though on the resources part. So on the HR, I know when I was trying to get the data, sometimes I will say it's a challenge to get the HR information because there's a lot of sensitive pieces. So as you're trying to get the data, there's also some things that you may not be allowed to have immediately until you prove your worth as well.
Well, to be fair, that is the response. It does happen with the HR data, but you'll get that response as you start your TBM journey from pretty much everywhere. Because very rarely will people say, just take all of our data. In fact, it's a good point, because people need to understand obstacles will be put in the way of you trying to get data, unless you're the data owner. And we have to be aware of human nature, right? People don't typically like just throwing open their data to anybody, sometimes for very good reasons, as you say, sensitivity, GDPR, whatever it would be, to go into here. So the other thing people often do is, you have to tell me exactly what data I need to provide, otherwise I don't do anything.
Yeah, I've
Now,
gotten that one.
I've found that because obviously we've done this a lot of times, probably several hundred, right, for me at this point in my career. It's often better to ask people, okay, if I need a data source to describe how many people work in different roles in IT, let's talk about the the HR data, right?
Okay.
What's the best source of data you could provide for me? Like, and I'm like, there's a couple of pieces I really want. I do want it to match a cost center.
Okay.
I want a volume unit of the amount of employees. I need some job titles, or at least job kind of broad areas. It doesn't have to say somebody's specific title, because sometimes they're very individual. And typically, if you ask the question that way, as opposed to try and make it like very explicit, specific around like I need this XYZ, you drive a better conversation and get a better response from that particular piece.
Is there a particular way, if you're new to this, and say, I know that issue because I had it, I had that obstacle. So is there a way that you know about those obstacles, or know, like, where could you go to know that they might not ask, like, you shouldn't try to get that data? Does that make sense, the question?
Yeah, sure. So in the, like, and obviously you have to answer this from a very Apptio specific viewpoint.
Yep.
Obviously, what we do there is a kind of data dictionary to say these are the kind of recommended pieces. These are, non-essential but nice to have type of elements. So you can give people a really good, robust view of like, it's this data topic, it's these fields. They typically come from these tools, which is a great way of starting that journey. I mean, even and we can flag in there whether a particular piece has some kind of sensitivity to it. It's also worth mentioning, obviously, because we have to comply with GDPR, other pieces ourselves, even in our products, not just in the way we market and bring things to the commercial market. So there's a lot of built-in kind of auditing control. Data can be masked. You don't have to bring that data in. Anybody who's joining us or is aware of what happens in Germany with the workers' councils, right? There's very strict rules around what data you can bring in around to identify people working in other pieces. So each country can have a very specific, unique type of approach to this. So yeah, you do have to be aware of it. But I think if you've got a partner, if you've got somebody who's helping you, stand this up, if you're thinking about it, a little bit of forethought, but also using your partnerships, your tooling providers, your consultants can really help in that respect.
And just to go into, because you kind of mentioned partner, one thing I notice is a lot of times there's a push sometimes from different people that you're working with of you need to get your data perfect, and then you can put it into a tool and then it's ready. Is that real? Do they need to do that?
It certainly happens, like in terms of it's real that many people do that. I've got examples of that even from this morning today, right? But for me, I think I wrote a LinkedIn article about this a long time ago. One of the key things about driving an improvement in data quality is start to use it. Like, unless you actually, if you kind of put like, I'm going to do a perfect data quality exercise, unless you know what you're going to use it for, it's never going to be quite right. Because Stu's law of data is you don't actually get the data you need until you try and use it. And it's when you try and use it, you think, oh, I didn't quite have that piece right. That's usually what happens is you're trying to answer a specific question or build something. So the idea of putting the kind of data quality initiative, obviously you're going to need something to start with, but the actual fact of trying to use it and then seeing where the gaps are is a massive help. Long time ago, I think it probably predates the TBM Council, starting in about 2013, wasn't it? I'm not sure if that's right, but I think it's around there.
Yep, that's predating.
One of the first sessions we did as a kind of user group for the TBM community, as it was then, had Rebecca Jacoby talking about her kind of Cisco implementation of TBM. And she was saying she let a couple of different teams start. And one of them, she said, okay, you go and do your data quality exercise. The other team was just asked to use like the tooling and bring the data in and then drive and identify what the gaps are. There was a year's difference between them getting value. So the team who went and did the data quality exercise weren't anywhere near being able to drive a decision or support like TCO analysis or run some processes until a year after the team who started with the guidance and just working with what they had. And then, I guess, refining more incremental improvements in the data based on what they were trying to do.
Well, I think too, because as you touch the things more, it then opens more questions of why did they do this? Where is this? Why is that tag like that? That doesn't make any sense, which then can lead to process improvement. Me, from an operations perspective, I love getting in the data to learn what I need to fix.
Yes,
Perfect.
totally agree.
Okay.
Do you want to come off the foundational topic, because we could go back from the slides? I think that's good, Talia, if we do that. Obviously, I will just mention at the top part of that, that's when you move into more of the advanced pieces. Those are the kind of CMDB, assets, servers, storage, data center, network devices, applications, business services. You can get into that. That's probably not quite as foundational, but it can be important to a lot of people. And then obviously having that business lens on top of it, if you're a bank, which parts of the business, is it retail, investment, what are all the different divisions within there that IT provides services to, and so on. Or if you're a different type of business, manufacturing, healthcare, whatever you are, you do at some point, for me, to drive the real value of TBM, want to get a business lens across it. But again, here's another key point around this. Sometimes data can serve more than one purpose. So if you bring in your HR data, for example, to start just around the kind of IT, FTE pieces, your internal, external employees, whoever they are, you've also got in the HR data, probably all of your business unit hierarchies everywhere, cost center kind of usually typically ties to the financial systems as well. So the HR data is a great reference source of data for your business itself, right?
To see where it is, how they line up, the different things.
As is often your financial ledger as well, your general ledger,
Now, I would say one of the things that you did make a great call out was that on data, you're normally, somebody else owns it, somebody else, you're going to that. So those are the experts. So how do you use the people who actually make the data to understand it? Because at the end of the day, when I went to TBM, I sat in IT, but I was a non-IT employee. So when somebody said the word LAN and WAN, I thought, what in God's name are you saying? How do I tag this? How do I do this data? You're asking me to go and do allocations to tell a story, and I don't even know what a LAN or a WAN is, and how do I get it there? So can you help? One, you don't have to tell them what a LAN and WAN is. They can figure that out on their own. I had to do that. So, but how do you work with the people who actually own the data to understand it, to know what it means, to help you actually get smarter faster, as opposed to you trying to figure out all the problems?
Sure, yeah. There's a couple of probably a couple of good lessons to share with the audience around how we've done that over the years. One is, I think, if it's just a request for data, unless it's a really simple request that you don't need to dress up too much and you've got a good relationship with the people who own the data, I think explaining why you want to use it, right? Explaining the purpose of what you're trying to do, getting them at least aware of the knowledge. Maybe there's a kind of give to get type of process you go through with, like, if you can share that data with me, there may be things that you can get back out of this. So you at least get them on side in terms of, it isn't just like, hey, that's your data, we're going to use it in an appropriate fashion. So do the explanation about why you want it, how it's going to be used, and then work out if there's anything from the kind of TBM pieces you're going to build out. Because as I said, TBM basically breaks down into things that you will support from a decisioning analytical viewpoint. I really need to know the total cost of this because I want to drive X, Y, Z in terms of decisions. Or I need to do like, a planning process or a charge back, show back, or capturing demand or something else that's more process driven, right? If you can explain that to people, you'll often get them on side much more easily than just making a fairly,
give me your data now because my boss said so.
Exactly.
Okay.
But then there's another part to your question again, and I'm going to lose my train of thought slightly. But it's I think if you do a kind of session with them as they hand over the data, organize a 30-minute call and just take them through it. Like, here's what I can see from the data. Is that right? What do these concepts mean in here? I'm not familiar with those. Obviously, things like Google and ChatGPT can often be your friends now in terms of helping you to understand things really quickly. But drive it as a conversation. It's not just like, hey, can you email me this? Also, because you want to work out, obviously, to operationalize this over time, as well as identify which systems are record and who owns that and who has, responsibility for it. at some point, you're going to want to operationalize that and automate it. Like
Mhm.
you want to sort of, so work with those teams, because then you can work out, okay, this could be an API call.
API, yep,
This
integration.
could be something where it's a database, but it's, homegrown, and we could call it this way. It might be a web call or something. It might just be like an FTP type of directory structure you set up to help these pieces. So building those relationships, explaining why, running the session to make sure and check and validate you understand the data. And you'll find, obviously, over time that you as a TBM office, a TBM program, you'll have some of the best data in the company.
Mhm.
Then you can start to give back, and it becomes more of a quid pro quo type of arrangement where you can provide things back because they've got decisions they're trying to face. Maybe somebody's trying to work out where to launch a new part of the business or where some efficiencies could be found. So you can make that a nice kind of circular, reciprocal kind of arrangement. So that's definitely helped, yeah.
And I think another good thing to call out too is as we are taking data from other people, one of the things also I think why people get that's mine, don't touch it, is because the way in which you present the data. You can basically manipulate data to tell any story that you want. So I think you made a really good call of building and establishing that relationship, because you could do it in a light that reflects poorly on them or on their their cost center or their business.
Yeah, a good point. I can think of an example. I won't mention the company, but I'd say a fair few years ago, we were working on a TBM program that did include like data center, server storage type of operations. And the storage team of that particular company were not fans of what we were doing with TBM. And I'll give you the reason why. One is because their management was very focused on finding efficiencies and savings. So no one wants to be exposed and made to look like they've made awful decisions over the previous 3 or 4 years.
They're the reason.
They are the reason why, we're 10% over budget each year and XYZ. So another good lesson to learn is like, you are going to find some waste, right? You are going to find areas of efficiency. They weren't done deliberately. They were done because people felt like they needed that capacity at the time, and it was the right decision. But now you can give them a view of the capacity, the cost, the continued use, all those things coming together, where if they had that ability to see it, they would also make different decisions. They wouldn't be driving any kind of inefficiency in that way. But the other piece, which is really important, as you're doing those things, find areas where it supports how well they're doing. Like, so with the storage management team where I was, this kind of anecdotal evidence I'm giving you here, as I said, they would vary against what some of the pieces we showed, but then we also showed how much older kind of technical debt they were running with, how their uptime and availability and the kind of throughput of the storage was really, really good. And they liked that, being able to defend it, because they wanted to refresh some of the architecture, but they were doing a great job with some of that. Now, was all the storage used? No. Was there areas of pockets of inefficiency? Were there some examples of really low criticality kind of applications running on SAN on disk, or disk storage that was super expensive at the time? Yeah, of course there were, but they were also doing a really good job in many other ways. And whether it's about storage or anything else, you want to provide a balanced picture from the data. Whilst you may have people pushing you to find savings and drive towards efficiencies and that kind of thing, you can still do a lot to prove and defend how well people are doing, and not make them feel like this is just a way of like a blame game.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with TBM that maybe isn't always explained as well, or that we could do a better job, is that there is a big aspect that you do need leadership to drive things down, but you also need somebody in your TBM office that can evangelize, be able to speak to, the positive and why we're doing this and how this is good for you. Because I know when I was doing it, my CIO loved all the things we were showing it. And then all of the other teams were like, it's wrong, it's awful, and we hate you. And so, going into a new environment and just learning TBM, and then, not knowing that people are going to be impacted by the stories you're telling, I think it's helpful so that you get to build a relationship instead of where you just feel like, oh God, every time I go in a room, they're mad.
Yeah. Well, look, listen, TBM is as much a people business as it is a data business, right?
Yep.
Data is the kind of lifeblood and the kind of, that kind of, it is, the blood running through the veins of TBM. But sooner or later, like, people have to shake hands, people have to talk to each other. And that's what you're trying to support around that kind of decision and kind of process pieces, is people collaborating in a better way and other pieces. So the more you can do to make it people focused as opposed to like dry data type of focused, the better you'll be in all of those pieces. And you also have to understand, and again, this probably comes a little bit from my kind of sales kind of solution consulting type of background. There's a fear factor when anything new comes in, right? I've been in, I think in my 20s, we were adopting some software. I was in the news business at that time. And it was going to automate a lot of stuff that we'd been doing in operations previous to that, like fairly manually, right? We'd run scripts and we'd kind of set things up so we could see if something had fallen over. Really simple stuff, could be heartbeat, could be disk space for going back way into kind of into operational pieces. And then tools like HP OpenView, Netcall, Tivoli, all those kind of things started to come out and automate all these tests to make sure that you could meet your SLAs and get the availability and performance.
Yep.
And a lot of people didn't like it because they're like, well, that's my job. I'm the guy who checks these things. I'm the team. We look after these things. And some of this is, and people are going to face that now with like, AI type of another pieces. So the idea is, and I guess what I'm trying to guide people to do, try and understand that there will be a fear when something new is coming in and get people to, you maybe won't get them to embrace it straight away, but you should be able to get them to at least understand why it's being done and that it doesn't mean the end of their role. It can be a morphing of their role into something perhaps a little bit different where they're not just pushing data together, but can actually provide more analytics back to it, or can take a couple of days out of their time each month to kind of improve some of the other pieces they do. It doesn't necessarily mean that something is going to go away or that your job is up. But I will say I've seen plenty of TBM programs where one person can really be an obstacle to automation.
Everything.
And it can be like they just, at that point you do need a sponsorship. You do need to be able to say, look, we need to go around this. This is now become a blocker for us being able to do anything. So yeah.
No, I know it's people, it's hard with things like that. I mean, I would just say as being an operations person, I find the more that you ask somebody else about what they do, people love to talk about themselves. So having the ability to say, what do you do? Can you explain this to me? And just like your situation you said earlier about said scenario, but it's not a real world. And now I just lost my train of thought. But anyways, I went blank. It's fine.
Should we
let's go into our next area of focus.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a question in the chat in regards to?
Could you tell me what the question, because I don't see the chats at all.
Oh, no problem. How did you turn the corner from other teams outside of IT saying it's wrong, it's awful, we hate you?
Okay. So hopefully there'll be some people on the call who also have an opinion on this, because I'm going to sort of reference at least one of my kind of good friends from the TBM community, Rich Phillips. A lot of people start with that, like, this is wrong. There's a fear factor over that. Once you start to show it and people understand and can validate it and other pieces, it often turns out not to be wrong, or if it is wrong, you at least understand why and you show them you're fixing it. So you make it that kind of, you don't have to be so blunt around, like, from a kind of TBM perspective, like, this data shows XYZ. You can have it as a conversational piece to say, look, this is what the data appears to show. Is that an anomaly? How do we understand if that's giving us a correct picture? The other piece that I would always recommend to people, very few decisions are taken as a result of TBM data that happen like that. Like, this is not, cloud cost management where all of the data is coming in from a very known type of source, like utilization
instantly.
cost. Yes, where you can say, look, that service had no activity. We're going to right size that. We're going to terminate that. Those are fairly easy decisions to make in the cloud world. They're not easy, but they're much easier than in the TBM world. In the TBM world, even if the data is showing a path to a decision, like pointing out potentially some waste, inefficiency, or something you maybe would correct or change, you'll have a kind of another process that sits behind that. So the identification of those targets, okay, that they look like reasonable targets to go and get. So you've got to take people through that. It's not like TBM is put in place and then suddenly the whole environment changes daily, weekly, whatever it is from TBM. There's a process people go through to say, potential decision over here. Let's monitor that for a week. Is that, is the data we're getting really true? But that applies to all data situations, right?
Yep.
Again, I won't mention the example, but we were using TBM to do like, cloud and other kind of infrastructure type of analysis. And that there was a team who were quite aggressive about the fact they did all this themselves. But when we looked at their data, they were taking 2 data points over a period of 6 months. And even though both of those were quite busy data points, the fact that they only had 2 in 6 months meant that it looked like they had no utilization and we're going to turn things off. That needs to be a daily, hourly type of, you want to view that. The fact you've only got 2 data points means that's not, that's just an anomaly in those 2 data points.
Yep.
You can't extrapolate from that into a longer term pattern. So I'd say, a little bit of investment in your own learning around data pays dividends. Talking about it in the right way. Remember, you're dealing with people who will have their fears and understand, want to understand how you're going to use it and other pieces. All of those things come into play, really.
Yep. And I think it's also it is just a rinse and repeat of you've got to also, as you're hearing the questions, if you're not replying with a legitimate answer that makes sense to them, like, well, that's just what it's telling me. Like, you've got to be a little more specific on how you did the allocations. Like, if you're going in to present out data, I think you need to have some background and context, because one of the things where I know that you can go sideways is if when they drill in, because they know the data so well, where it's not actually your data source. And so they'll just go drill down and down further where you don't have that context sometimes. So I think there's also you've got to let them know how much knowledge you have of the data, how you allocated it, and then like what made you come up with that decision, so that it's a conversation is how I see that.
Yeah, and I think it's worth I'm glad you said that, because it also kind of spurred me into a couple of other thoughts, right? One is the conversation will be slightly different depending on the data topic. Like if it's a cost that you're showing, and it's being calculated in your TBM tool, it's a kind of stitched together of various elements that get up
An allocation.
And it's it's part of it's indirect, some of it's direct in other pieces. Then being able to explain that and go back to the source is really important to show, okay, this data started here. Because you'll often find sometimes when you see, let's say you end up with a TCO of an application or a service, there's way more than anybody thought it was.
Yep.
Right. So you should be able to drill back and say, oh, okay, maybe it was a mistake in the allocation strategy. Maybe I've weighted something where I thought it was just for this specific application, but that's actually several, 100 kind of pieces in the overall IT estate and so on. So you've actually kind of inadvertently and inappropriately weighted something towards one specific thing that should have been shared. But if it's something like, let's say, a lot of people in their TBM journeys as they mature will bring in things like consumption and utilization data. If you've got those records saying, look, this server's peak capacity it ever uses is 5% of its overall, processing power, it's difficult to argue against that. So I would say, be clear on where your sources of data are coming from. Be clear on whether it's something that's specifically from a system of record, or it's something being created as part of your TBM metrics, calculations, and allocations. Know the source. So there's ways, do you see what I mean? There's ways to bring those things together. For anybody in the kind of TBM product world, actually something that perhaps we should do in Apptio, when you're in a report, you should be able to kind of show, and a lot of customers do this actually, put the sources of data in there. If there's 3 sources of data, if there's the GL, the fixed asset register, have it so that people at least know the starting point of that data and other pieces. And also as part of your office, data governance, other pieces, think about your allocations as data, in terms of like, are these kind of fairly generic because that's all we can support at this point? We're very early in our journey. Have these become more like, the recommended best practices and so on? So a lot of times when I've done TBM work with people, I will, when we're drilling into something, I will put the allocation strategies in there so they can see them in the report. So they can see how much of the cost is kind of through recommended kind of relationships and other pieces that Apptio particularly recommend, right? And how much is more kind of a generic kind of weighting. It's I try not to use even splits, but I guess people can't avoid that at certain times. So data sources, being clear around allocation strategies, but also being specific around the kind of data topic you're talking to are really important points.
Now, one of the things though, you mentioned just even the second slide there were tons of different data sources. And so if you're in the TBM office, you know, you're either coming from finance, business, or IT, only a handful of those will be for the space that you're comfortable in. So how do you advise somebody who is taking on data that they're, you know, if you're a finance person now, you've gone into technology, very different types of data and sets. How much should they learn about that information, or to be able to, because they have hard times asking the questions for it, different things. So like, how far down the rabbit hole do you go in the TBM office?
I think like any investment you make in your own education, right, typically pays dividends, right? So, and that applies across the board. But you do need to go and understand containers and, you know, the intricacies of different database type of architecture and platforms. No, you don't. You just need to know that a database is a store of data that people can query. Like, so find a friendly, and I think a lot of people in the TBM community are really good at doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so use your resources in terms of, if you've got something, even if it seems silly, yeah, again, ChatGPT and the kind of AI tooling can be your friends, because you can ask what you might think is a silly question that exposes some ignorance, but it's only to your computer.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's all logged, and
it is. They know everything, and
something
they
come back and haunt you with it one day.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know what I'm saying. So I would say, and actually to echo a point you made earlier, right? Most people love talking about themselves and their jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, find someone like me who talks for a living, you know, find, you know, the partner community, go and find somebody in technology who can say, you know, explain, okay, yeah, that's just a, you know, storage technology. You don't need to know the ins and outs of everything, but the broad topics are enough for a lot of, you know, TBM, particularly for people in finance. And often, you know, you'll see money being spent on different things. And, you know, like I must admit, with an IT background, one of the biggest shocks I ever had in my career was when I realized how much IT equipment cost. Like the first time I saw how much an Oracle database license cost, it was more than my annual salary. And that was just one. That was more than
upsetting.
I had no idea. I thought this was going to be like my perception of what the cost was.
Yeah.
Now I was young at the time, but it was like, wow, that's quite shocking. Yeah. So, you know, there are things to people in IT that finance wouldn't find shocking, and you know, vice versa. So I think one of the benefits of this obviously approach is you are bringing those different lenses, business, IT, and finance together, and I think we can all help each other.
Yeah, it's just like, for instance, if you think about finance, they see people's salaries all day long.
Yeah.
I mean, most normal people, if you see a salary where you're like, oh my God, Tom makes that much, I swear to God, I'm going to kill somebody. Like, no way. That's why I couldn't be in finance, because I wouldn't like that. But
No.
So we do have a couple questions. So I see, based on your experience, is there a good starting point
For TBM generally?
I think for the data perspective, John, is that specific? I would assume the conversation's about data, so let's assume John is talking about data.
Yeah, I guess where I was going with,
Oh, for example,
Okay,
do you start with business data or financial data?
I would start with the financial data.
Start with
right?
the financial.
Like, I would say that you could make an argument to say, you know, make it kind of slightly outcome driven. Like, what are you trying to get to? Like, if you're trying to, but honestly, like, you know, all roads lead to Rome. I think there's an old saying like that. Most things start with the financial data. It is the foundation of TBM, right? Unless you can describe what you're spending on technology on a kind of per month, per week, whatever the time frame is, you know, unless you are just doing like volume sort of demand type of exercises within TBM, which, you know, very adjacent kind of use case. But when we talk about like the technology and the business management all coming together, you're going to start with the foundational finance data.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I would also, too, to add on to that, of if you're new to this and you're trying to sell this aspect, don't bring in every single piece of your fixed register, your CMDB, your like, because those bring in levels of complexity. They also bring in levels of more stories, more information, more ways to see where you can do savings, but also there's a process about learning, looking at the data, putting in a tool. If you rush to try to get everything all at once, I find that it's never ends up really getting done right in the first place, because you got to put the foundations.
That's true, right? But I think it's worth mentioning that your overall, like, you know, like some architectural blueprint you've got in your head for what you want your program to do.
Yeah.
If that's there, then that informs where you go with the kind of data request and other pieces, right? It's like, the foundations, like the finance probably doesn't change so much. You're still going to need that financial level of data. But depending on where you're going, whether you get into like, application TCO, or as I said, like the business unit type of show back, charge back, you want to show each business entity what it actually costs to run their IT services. That can make a difference in where you then prioritize your data journeys after that. So it should be specific. And I think one of the things you and Tilia flagged to me was talking about like specific business outcomes and how that drives the different requests for data. So I would say it's always worth the Simon Sinek book, that kind of start with why type piece. Having that uppermost in your mind is a great thing to have, because it does help you shape and prioritize and then cope with. I think that's a really good approach I've seen. Second one I've seen,
go ahead.
Second one I've seen, I think some of our partners do very well in the delivery of TBM programs. Take a fairly agile sprint-based approach, focus on a topic for 3 or 4 weeks at a time and try and get that piece sorted out and then move on to the next piece. Yeah, sorry, it's a long about that.
It's gone now, so it's fine. I'm sorry, everybody. It was going to be the greatest question of all times, and he didn't let me. Chase, great to see you here. I'm glad that you agree on the core data quality KPI on a report helps drive the conversation. Chase is always good for some nice quality feedback. So I've got Sammy here saying, did you ever experience any conflicts or objections from the finance department? And that's a new person.
Yes and no. Like I'd say I've seen from the finance department, if you think that's Sammy, right? If you think of the point I was making earlier around, sometimes people can block because they see a fearful factor. So I've definitely seen a few finance people who a lot of their job is actually to create Excel-based reports, a lot of which can be automated through TBM. You think when the month closes in terms of the financial books, people do and want to see like, okay, where are we spending against plan? These kind of reports. A lot of those things rightly can be automated with TBM and be available within 1 or 2 days of the month-end close. But if your job is like, you spend a week putting together those nice reports in Excel, that is fearful. So you've got to be conscious about where people are coming from, understand what the objection or blocker is for them, talk about how it can help. I've never really had anybody from a finance thing say that they just won't allow the data, because again, it goes back to the sponsorship and the reason why you're doing the program, and that kind of understanding the why of why TBM is being brought in, or at least investigated for as to why it could be coming in.
Well, where there can be the blocker, and what Sammy's saying, because I had this happen to me, is with if the CIO is bought in, but the CFO isn't bought in, that can cause issues. But also the challenge that I had from my finance business partner was that he reports out to the cent how much something cost. And then he thought his stakeholders they're used to seeing Salesforce cost X, this cost X, but now we're showing a product or TCO or an application TCO or whatever we're trying to do. And it doesn't match how his numbers look. So there was that argument of, well, who's right?
Yeah,
that was my problem with my finance business partner.
That's fair. And I've seen that echoed in sometimes when people are running some form of chargeback or showback process, where a new calculation methodology can often produce a different result.
Messes up
and then you've got winners and losers in terms of, well, I was only paying X for that service before, and now it looks like you want to charge me Y. So yeah, you're right. There are elements there where it can cause issues. I think that the again, honesty, transparency is the best kind of recourse in those situations. You want people to understand, hey, those aren't they might look like the same value. Let's say you used the example of Salesforce. The CFO is giving them a kind of license cost. The TBM program may give the fully loaded cost that includes support, security, the network, the kind of other pieces. So I think the more you can explain where that delta comes from, the better and easier it is. And obviously that's great. I mean, if they've got good data describing my license costs, I'd take that as a positive, because a lot of people don't even have that to start with, right? So you can work with them and say, okay, we'll still continue to show your cost, that you report. So they'll always see that number in there, and then we'll make it clear that we're adding on the rest of the cost that should be associated with somebody having a Salesforce administrator, viewer, whatever type of license that's in there. So yeah, there's always ways to cope with those issues.
I think you're always going to have blockers of to where it's just something that you've got to, in this space, you almost have to think of yourself as an organizational change management. If you go in demanding, bullying, they don't have to sometimes. Because you're also, I think one of the challenges I find from data from TBM is they don't actually have to give it to you sometimes. Like, unless a sponsor or C-level tells them, I mean, they can say no. So it's figuring out, if you don't figure out the right approach to collaborate, to partner, to work with them, and it just makes it so much easier. Nobody likes to fight anyways.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like, one more point you remind me of.
Okay.
Again, going back in the early part of my Apptio career, I joined a call with Gartner, who were just trying to understand the TBM space, and this is literally like 2010, 2011. So I guess it was the early days of TBM, but they organized calls with 5 customers, 3 of whom were in the US at that time. And the Gartner guy was asking them, what has been the impact? And actually, to my surprise, because I thought, everything was going to be around return on investment. We've driven this in terms of value. The biggest impact, and the one thing that every one of those customers said, was the impact on the relationship between IT and the business. So that collaborative type of nature. So whilst data and these things can drive some people's sort of their limbic type of response in terms of fight or flight, for a lot of people, once they start to have something that we can see it and it's explainable and it has data quality metrics and governance and other pieces in there, it actually genuinely helps build a better relationship and collaboration between different parts of the business.
Well, I think especially too, as the business gets, we're doing more IT things. They're doing more with applications, and they know what IT is saying now. So it's a lot of, you've got to understand what it is, learn from it, know what you should, the same that goes for IT, of they should learn, what does the business do? Why aren't they using this data? What, there's better conversations if you know what you're talking about.
I will also say that, as with most things in life, right, you can approach from a relatively negative, fearful viewpoint. My approach has always been, I think IT and finance people and those people that kind of underpin the business, in many ways, they're the heroes of the business, right? They don't get a lot of credit because no one really notices if stuff is just working and there and available when you need it, and expenses are paid and everything else, payroll runs. So they're never going to get the kudos of the big hitters and the sales teams and other people like that, the creatives. But TBM kind of gives them that hero status, because you can see and connect it to, I've always liked that approach, and I try and take that into when I'm working with people, so they can really understand that you're not approaching it from just going to find everything wrong in your organization, we're going
to fire everyone and you're all out of here.
Yeah, this is not a Doge type of thing. It's we want to get into the fact that we're trying to support people, show potentially where things could be improved, but also really defend what people are doing, and that approach on its own seems to serve us pretty well in terms of getting past some of the objections and fear factor involved in this.
Yep, no, that makes sense. Let's see, we have a couple. So, okay, Lindsay, I don't know, how would you show those data sources? I need more information, Lindsay Tier. So if you could.
I suspect, if I guess in,
okay. Is this in your legal law book that you were talking about?
No, but I'm just thinking probably because we've mentioned, maybe put some of the data sources into the reports.
Okay.
So I've seen done a couple of different ways. One is when you let's say when you drill down, just put a footer on the report page.
PowerPoint reciting sources.
Yeah. Okay. So just put a footer on the table or the chart or whatever it is on the the report that pops up to say data sources XYZ, or make it in parentheses as part of the table header or whatever report header. Or there's normally enough screen estate where you can maybe just put a little blurb of text and so on. There's ways to do that. Excuse me, just clear my throat.
Oh, okay. Right. Sammy, don't worry. I've seen you have 3 things, so I want to make sure to get it all. So as GL, P&L, and it's not, I don't want to say BS data because that's not what it is. Are audited at least once a year. You could assume this can be done, be one of the foundations of truth for TBM. Do you have a feeling that data requirements are getting more granular over time with increasing pressure to provide more near real time than only in once a month?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, right? I think yeah, predominantly what drove that was the fact that cloud became a very almost real
So
time.
you should get in a second.
It's not quite real time, you know, different providers have different mechanisms. Sometimes the data updates a couple of times a day, sometimes more frequently, you know, several times a day. So there are areas where people want to get into that kind of more granular. I guess we've often faced within kind of the TBM world that I've been involved in, you know, things move around from an IT perspective. So we've been able to kind of operate where perhaps the CMDB needs a kind of daily type of piece. It's the finance really. You know, every data has a cadence and a frequency. For a long time, finance data has been monthly. So it's been okay to kind of, you know, work on that basis and have a snapshot of where the IT applications and servers and storage and other pieces are on a monthly basis. Obviously, because you can collect data more frequently than that, you can still collate what's happened in terms of consumption or anything else during the course of the month and summarize that. But generally, the broad thrust of Sammy's question there around, do I think it's going to be more granular and more frequent? Yeah, absolutely. It's now the other things that had to happen to kind of give us that ability to do that. One, you think like the actual data storage needed to kind of keep expanding the speed at which it could store data, and obviously like the database technologies, the kind of, you know, Databricks and data AI type of things. It now becomes, you know, TBM. Again, going back to the early days, it was much more efficient than trying to look at several 100,000 lines of you know, Excel spreadsheet type things, because it could summarize and bring things together and understand that in a couple of seconds. You know, we think the kind of way in which even Apptio kind of expanded from being able to run 1 million allocations to, you know, 10 million to 50 million. It's all
it
those
takes
things.
time and effort and things. Now we only have, because who knew that data could be so exciting? We have 7 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
we've actually flown through it. So I want to at least, let's do the last 2 questions, but let's go quickly through them so that we can still, because I allow people time to ask questions at the end.
Yeah, sure.
So just quickly, how do you assess the quality of your data to ensure sort of actionable insights of like that it's wrong? How do you get to figure out ways for process improvement, if that makes sense?
Sure. Yeah, I think like, and there's some really good things baked into Apptio for this, right? So one is to actually look at the data fields, and you should have some idea of the expected values, right? So if it's a percentage utilization type of field, it shouldn't really have a value over 100 unless it can burst way over 100, right? And it shouldn't have non-numeric data in there. And then likewise, when you see other things, perhaps to do with size or capacity, you could look at that and say, that number's 10x larger than I was expecting. So then you need to go back and check like the unit, you know, is it bytes, is it kilobytes, is it megabytes, terabytes, whatever it is, like, you know, so you've got to work sensibly within that to sort of verify the kind of integrity of the data. Secondly, like understand where the gaps are. Maybe, you know, sometimes records are missing. So again, that's something that can be scored really easily to see where, okay, we don't know that for this technology, for this you know, vendor, for XYZ, whatever purpose. So understand where the gaps are. I would also say, and go back to that base point I made, whatever conclusion you can take from it, explore that. Like, you know, say, okay, this is what this data is showing. I don't necessarily think that's right, but that's what it's saying. How would I verify that? So if you're being told, you know, like, let's say, for example, you end up with an application that is 10x more expensive than anybody thought. Just drill back into it and say, okay, where does that 10x come from? Is it like, have we got, is 90% of our server estate running that application? Is, you know, when we go back through the kind of layers of the TBM framework, back to the kind of, you know, cost source, the master kind of structure down there, is it people? Is it something else? How is it picking that up from what we've done? I think, you know, there are some good KPIs, you know, completeness, kind of like referential kind of integrity pieces. I'm waffling a little bit, so
That's fine.
we should
It's
we should
okay.
probably
We'll
skip
go
through.
to the next. Come on, we can do it. So tailoring, so how do you actually tailor your data to meet specific business outcomes?
Sure. So certain business outcomes obviously do have a specific need. Like if your job is to drive the identification of efficiency savings,
Okay.
like, it's a bit glib, but I'll say it. There's only really two ways to save money in anything, right? You either identify things that you need to do, and look at a cheaper alternative for satisfying it, whether it's, your morning coffee from Starbucks, change to a different chain, or use a discount or whatever you've got, or whether it's something you're doing in IT that actually is super expensive and you think, okay, there's perhaps a slightly cheaper way of satisfying that need. That's way one.
Yep.
Method two is you find the stuff that you're doing that you just don't need to be doing, right?
Yep.
So at some point when you're driving towards that efficiency piece, you're going to need to bring data together that shows the utilization, that has a sense of the capacity you're paying for and how much you're using, because that's what allows you to say there's a delta between I'm paying for X, I'm only using Y.
What's happening?
Yeah, I need to tailor this capacity down, or I've got these amount of licenses and only 50% of them are actually in use and so on. So the specific goal you've got should drive you into always going to need financial data. You're always going to need a picture of what the resources that you put in those foundational pieces at the very beginning. You're always going to need a sense of the kind of activity and asset type of things you have. Perhaps you don't always, because you can do a chargeback without that. But if you're doing, chargeback, show back, you're going to need a sense of what the business is doing, how many people are involved. Some of the allocations are going to be very headcount driven, because that can be a big driver of cost for IT. The more people you've got, people need desktops, laptops, mobile devices. So it's again, I would say that met great partners over the years who work in the TBM space. Again, Apptio has very specific kind of data guidance for specific topics. I think one of the best documents Apptio ever put together was a matrix that said these questions typically fail, like based on a hard to answer because of this. Here's the data you need. Here's the questions we answer, and so on. And it still actually gets used even today, and it must be at least 7-8 years old. So there's some really good resources, and take advantage of those.
Okay, great. All right. We have 2 minutes left to get all of the data that you can out of Stuart Meredith. So do we have any questions that we would like to ask? Pull up the chat just so I can see. We did answer a lot of questions. So if we don't, it's totally fine.
If I can echo, and just kind of reinforce one point.
Yes, please.
There's nothing to be scared of in the data. As I said, I've never seen a situation where TBM data has shown something and instantly a terrible decision has been made, right? It's like you're always going to have a process where the data looks like it's saying this, and okay, you could play that into maybe the chargeback pieces, someone's getting charged X. But you're going to run that process in a shadow process for at least a good few months. Make sure it's robust. That's part of the benefit of running it through the tooling and the delivery that we do. So there's nothing to be too fearful of in terms of it. It's not going to change everything as soon as the data lights up. You'll be able to see if it doesn't look right. You better see and score it and see the sources and drill back through it. So I think there's sometimes there's fear where there doesn't need to be that fear.
It's a great call out. So with that, we are at time. So I want to thank, one more question. So what key steps would you start with to have TBM and FinOps Mavens work together efficiently?
Yeah, I would say obviously, FinOps, obviously, because it's taking that real-time feed typically from AWS, GCP, whoever it is, that should be your system of record for your cloud, public cloud, private cloud type of billing. And feed that in. You perhaps don't need the same level of detail, but certainly, again, talking from Apptio's perspective, we've got cloud master data structures in there, so we know what we want from AWS. FinOps and tools like Cloudability can do a great job of bringing that in and having that so they can work in tandem with each other. So you've got your system of record for your cloud cost management in your FinOps tooling.
Yep.
And that can feed into your Apptio or other, TBM tooling to say like, this is like the record we get. And then you can match that against what's actually kind of hitting the ledgers and other pieces, so you can get all those things to
See if they
reconcile.
met.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I would use it in that order. We do have plenty of customers in Apptio who just use Apptio, so they're not looking for real-time type pieces, but yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sammy. Thank you for the question again. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please, we have these sessions multiple times during the month for different regions, so we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you and have a great evening. Bye.